Hey everyone, I wanted to go over this video that you watched yesterday. It is the HHMI Bio Interactive video about the Galapagos finches. So you should have watched this video and answered the questions that go along with it. And we are going to go over the answers to those questions today. So the first question says, different finch species have beaks of different shapes and sizes. What do the beak differences tell us? Now, if we look at these answer choices, A is differences in beak shapes tell us the finches eat the same type of food. Now, we know that is not true. The video specifically talks about the types of food that these finches eat, and we know that they eat lots of different things like bugs and seeds of different sizes, cactuses, etc. Cacti. Letter B is different finch beaks shapes are evidence that all Galapagos finches shared a common ancestor a long time ago. Now that second half of that answer is true. They did share a common ancestor a long time ago. However, the different finch beak shapes does not show that they did that. C. Different finch beak shapes are evidence that over time finch species adapted to different food sources on the islands. Now, that one may be true. We'll have to come back to it. D. Different finch beak shapes are evidence that several finch species with different beak shapes came to the Galapagos Islands from the mainland. Now, the video specifically says that that one is not true. They said that one type of finch species came to the Galapagos and then split off into different types of species. So, we know that A, B, and D are not true, so that means C must be our answer. Okay, so for question 2, genetic evidence supports which of the following explanations of the presence of 13 different finch species on the Galapagos Islands? Each of the 13 species were founded by an independent migration of a different species from the mainland to the islands. We know that one's not true. That would mean that 13 different types of birds came over to the islands. Many years ago, more than 13 different species of birds migrated to the island. The current 13 finch species are the only species that survived. Again, we know that's not true. The video says the direct opposite. It's not clear based on the DNA evidence whether the 13 species arose from a single migration of one species or multiple migration of several species from the mainland to the islands. Again, that is not true. The video says many years ago, a small population of a single finch species migrated to the islands and evolved into the current 13 species. The video specifically says that one type of bird came over, which we can see here, and then split into the different types of birds.
Different kinds of finches could have all come from the mainland separately, or the finches could have all evolved out there on the islands. And what do we know about that?
Well, now we know from DNA evidence that all of the finches are more related to each other than any one is to a species on the mainland. And that tells us only one species arrived on the archipelago and diversified into the 13 species that we see nowadays in the Galapagos.
So, as Dr. Grant said, many years ago, a single population of finch species migrated to the islands and evolved into the current species. They are more related to each other than they are to any of the species on the mainland. Okay, for our next set of questions, we're going to look closely at this graph here to the right. The question says, in 1977, Daphne Major experienced a severe drought. That means there was very little rain. The figure showed the beak depths of the initial population of medium ground finches before the drought, aka here in red, and of the drought survivors, aka here in black. So if you look at this chart, we can see that the most common one is 8.8. that is where most of the beak depth actually going to be. So most of the average of the beak depth will be about 8.8 or 9.3, somewhere in between there. So the average of the beginning population before the drought was around, let's say, 9. After the drought, you can see that the survivors had a much larger beak depth than the parent generation before the drought. So the average would be around 10.3, 9.8, somewhere between those. Now this question does say select all that apply. So what that means is that there's probably going to be more than one answer. Anytime you see a question that says select all that apply, assume that there will be more than one correct answer that you will have to select. So the first answer choice, the most common beak depth of the initial population in red was 8.8. You can see that this one right here does go all the way up to 8.8. That is the most common. So we know that one is correct. The black bar in there shows that very little of those initial population actually survived. This answer does tell us to select another answer, so we're going to look back at the chart and check the next answer. B says more than half of the initial finch population died during the drought. Now, if you see at the top, that is a 50. The largest one is going to be 50, and very little of them survived, less than half. So that is true. Now, this also says select another answer, so we're going to take a look at the next one. The most common beak depth of the surviving population, aka the black bars, was 10.3. Less than a quarter of those individuals' beak depth, with this beak depth from the initial population, survived the drought. So, the initial population of with a beak depth of 10.3 was about 30, whereas after the drought, about 10 survived. So that is more than a quarter. So that means that the answer is incorrect. So let's check D. Finches with larger beaks had a survival advantage in the 1977 drought. If we look at these data points in the black, we can see that the ones with the larger beak were most likely to survive that drought because they were best able to eat that food. So that means D is also correct. We are going to continue on. So this question does have two different charts. The top one shows the parents before the drought. The bottom one shows the offspring, or the babies born after the drought. So if you look at the top, the ones in black are the ones that survived long enough to actually reproduce. You can see the ones that survived were the ones that were 9.3, 9.8, 10.3. They survived the best. So you can see that it correlates with the ones that are most likely to come about later on, what the offspring are most likely to have. So notice this question does not say select all that apply. It just asks a question. So letter A, the average beak depth of the 1978 population is larger than that of the original 1976 population. You can see that the average beak depth for the original population was 8.8, whereas the one afterwards was 9.8. So that one seems to be correct. We'll check the other answers. Answer B says the finches that survived the drought, aka the black bars in the first graph, had offspring, aka the red bars in the second graph, with a much larger beak depth. Now, if we think about this, this says much larger. So the average beak depth was around 9 for the original parents, and then was around 9.8 for the offspring. So that means that the parent or the offspring do not have much larger beak depths than their parents, just slightly larger. Letter C says the offspring had a larger range than their parents for beak depths. So in the first one, the parents had a range from 7.3 to 10.8. The offspring had a range of 7.3 to 11.3. So that answer is not correct. Letter D, the size of the offspring population in 1978 is much smaller. So if you look, you can see the offspring chart only goes up to 40, whereas the parents go up to 50. That means the offspring are going to be a lot less than the parents, and there is going to be a much smaller population of offspring than there was of parents. So that answer is not going to be correct. So that leaves us with letter A. So when we click letter A, it is going to say correct. All right, the last question for this section. The Grants witnessed strong selection during the droughts in 1977 and 1985. And we're going to compare the two droughts. Again, this question does say select all that applies. That means there's going to be more than one answer. Letter A. In both droughts, larger beaked medium ground finches had the highest survival rates. Letter B. Both droughts resulted in strong natural selection on medium ground finch populations. Letter C. Both droughts resulted in changes to available food, which favored the survival of some medium ground finches over others. Now we know that A is incorrect because one of the droughts made it so that only certain small beaks survived as well because of the rainy, heavy season beforehand. So we know A is incorrect, which we do know that the droughts resulted in strong selection because it changed the available food. So letter B and C are correct. For the last set of questions, how did the Grants test their hypothesis that differences in finch songs can keep different species of finches from breeding with one another? Now we know that they did place stuffed females with different finch species on branches to see how the males respond, but the males can recognize the females not by their songs. So what they actually did was they played the songs of medium ground finches and the cactus finches to see which species responded to each song. Okay, for the last question on this video. The film defines species as populations whose members don't interbreed, aka they do not breed together. What keeps Galapagos finches from mating? Select all that apply. A. Individuals only recognize and respond to songs from their own species. Based on that last question, we know that's correct. One population eats mostly small soft seeds, while the population eats mostly large hard seeds. We know that one's incorrect because that does not prevent them from mating. So that means that A and C have to be correct.